Hello, my name is Michaël Green and I welcome you to the fourth episode of the podcast Historians in Conversation, which is hosted by the University of Leuven. Today my guest is Mirella Marini, who studied at the University of Leuven and today is an independent researcher. She's interested in early modern history and in particular in history of nobility. I will be talking to her about her idea how one can combine academic research and non-academic work. Mirella, welcome to my podcast, and I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm actually honored to have been invited, so thank you.
Thank you. And traditionally, I start this podcast by asking you about your childhood and what is your background, and also how did your interest in history develop? Was it from childhood or did it come at a later stage?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. So my childhood. I have a bit of an international background, to say it like that. My father is Italian. His father came to Belgium to work in the mines. So it's right after, I think, the Second World War. So my father was a baby, essentially, a very small child when he came to Belgium, and he grew up there and he met my mom. And my mom is kind of an interesting mixture of border people, in a sense that she is part German, part Belgian, and part Dutch. So I have this background of having kind of a link with Italy, a clear link, of course, with Belgium, because I was born and raised there. And at the same time, a link with Germany and with Holland, which I've always quite liked, the idea that I wasn't limited by the borders of one country. And I think that kind of made my childhood. I'm what you could call a migrant child. So I have this migrant background. At the same time, I'm not a stranger in my country. And I'm not sure if that's something that really determined my interests or my interest in history. I did always like stories, and I heard a lot of stories. I heard a lot of stories, of course, from my family, and so I was actually an avid reader from a very, very small age. I think it was 6 or 7. I started reading, but really in large quantities. I've always loved reading. And especially, I think, as a teenager, I had a very big love of historic novels. But the idea to study history, that was absolutely not in my mind. I loved history. It was one of my favorite subjects in school. I especially liked my Latin classes. So I think if I had started studying history or a history-related subject right after secondary school, I would probably have become a classicist and not an historian. So I think that's kind of, weird, not really related to my background or growing up. It's just stories. I loved stories in every form that they take. I still do, actually.
And what were your parents doing for a living?
Well, my father is a photographer. That's his profession. And my mom took care of her children. So I have an older brother and an older sister. And I think my sister is, if I look at all my cousins, I think she's the eldest. And she was actually the first one to start higher studies. And so the idea of studying, of actually going to university later on, was kind of new in the family. So it's not something that I really saw at home. The only thing that my parents had, I think that's quite typical for parents with a migrant background, is that education was very important for us. So the idea of performing well in school, of doing your best, of preferably having good results in school, of going to study. That was really, really, really very important. Which at the same time, I think somehow excluded studying history, because it's very much a useless subject. You know, it doesn't save lives. It doesn't make you rich. It doesn't, you know, it's one of these subjects. I love it, and I don't think it's useless. But I think in society, when people think of professions or studies that matter, history is not the first thing that comes to mind. And I think that's the reason why it didn't really come to mind when I went to university at age 18. I wasn't supposed to. I was supposed to do, I was a high achiever at school, so I was supposed to do something useful. And so
Where did
any
you
mention, you know, of history or other related subject, that was just a big no.
where did you study at school? In which place did you grow up in Belgium?
I grew up at the border, at the Belgian border in the province called Limburg. So at the border with Holland and Germany. And that growing up at the border was actually a great thing. That really marked my childhood, I think. People who live at borders are different. They know that borders are, for the most part, imaginary, and that people's lives are a lot more complicated than you know what you might think if you think a border is something very definite. I mean, lots of my friends came from so-called, you know, mixed marriages, Belgians and Dutch who married, or Belgians and Germans, or whatever. You just crossed the border continuously, even, you know, to do something cultural or to go to an amusement park or to shop, but you're continually crossing the border. I think that makes border people really interesting people.
That's true. You perhaps heard about the project of Violet Schoon about the border people, and I found it
Exactly.
such a fascinating project.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so how was decision to go to the university was taken, and to which university you went?
I just always wanted to go to Leuven. There was never any doubt in my mind that I was going to go to Leuven. Nobody in my family had gone there, but it had a sort of like I don't want to say a mythical status, but I mean, it was, you know, the oldest university. It had a reputation. You know, the idea was that if you had a degree from Leuven, that you really had, you know, good degree. Of course, all that is exaggerated. We have several very good universities in Belgium, and one degree is not worth less or more than the other degrees. But I think that was, I mean, I mean, it's 30 years ago. And especially, I think, in groups of people that have less experience with university education, I think this still counts, this idea, that sort of mythical thing about, yeah, Leuven, that's, you know, you should go there because that's the best university. So the
And it's a
decision was
beautiful
actually
city.
taken, really. It is. It's still one of my favorite cities in Belgium. I have very fond memories of it. So yeah, there was never any doubt that I would go to Leuven. I don't know what age I can't remember not considering myself as, you know, somebody who would go to study. I don't think there was ever any point in my life when I was conscious about education and studying and things like that I ever doubted the fact that I would go to study. I read all the time. I loved exploring new things, interested in a lot of subjects. So I mean, yeah, I always knew that I was going to study. I just didn't know what for a long time, but I did know that I was going to Leuven.
I see that in your CV that you have actually studied also law.
That's what I started out as doing at the age of 17. As I said, I was really in doubt for a very long time, and I've always been interested in science. So at the age of 16, 15, 16, my idea was actually to go into the exact sciences. I've always been a lover of everything that has to do with space. So I very much saw myself as doing something, technical or scientific. And my brother's an engineer, so I guess I saw that as an example as well. But that all changed. From my 5th year in secondary school, I went to study languages. I'd already been doing Latin, but I was doing Latin and sciences, Latin mathematics. And then from my 5th year, I was doing languages. And that completely oriented me into a different direction. And the only thing I knew was that I didn't want to study languages. I love languages. I love doing that, but that was not something I wanted to study. And then, I don't know, with talks in school, looking over lists of what I could do. And then the safest option, I guess, was let's go to law school. It's something that I can do, that gives you lots of options. And I thought it was, a degree that was broad enough to open up several possibilities, which at the same time was maybe not a very good idea, because I quite like the idea of doing a very specific thing and specializing. So I was a bit disappointed doing law. So it's a bit too much to say that it was a complete disaster. I am quite proud of the fact that I did have my bachelor's. But that was it. I quit. And I think that was a very good decision. And quitting law is actually what opened up other possibilities. Maybe realized that there were other things that I was interested in. And that's how I came to study history when I was already working, actually.
And I wonder what made you realize that you would like to continue history on a higher level? So what made you go into master's and PhD in history? What was your aim, if you had one?
What was my aim? I just love doing it. It was really strange, but my experiences in law school left me with an intense, very, very intense fear of failure. I'm a perfectionist, and failing over and over again is, that was really detrimental to my mental health. And so I was actually very, very scared to go back to study. And thankfully, I had my husband to help me. And we knew each other from law school, but he had actually started studying history before I met him. So I met him afterwards again. We knew each other, but so when we started dating, he had already completed his history degree, and he was studying political sciences. And but finally, I met somebody with whom I could discuss history. I could talk about stories, and he had lots of stories, and my big love for stories just came out. And he suggested, but you really want to study again, so what is your problem? Why don't you go study history? And I immediately knew when he suggested it, said, yeah, that's it. I just need to do history. And when I started studying history, I felt like I was coming home, which is a very strange thing to say. But I've always very much, first of all, liked to be at a university. I liked studying. I liked working at university. It still feels like home to me. The academic world is home. And I continue to refer to it as home. And so when I was studying history, and I noticed that, first of all, I didn't have a fear of failure anymore. It was gone magically after my first year. I did quite well. I loved doing it. I was intrigued by the idea of doing research, not just reading stories, but finding things out and making these stories. That I just knew that was what I wanted to do. And that wasn't really obvious because I think, especially in Belgium, I don't know how it is in many other countries, but when you study history, the first question is always, okay, so you want to teach then? Because that's kind of like an obvious thing. You studied history, so now you're going to teach, preferably so secondary school. That's what people think. And my idea was never, ever to teach at secondary school. Not that I have anything against it, but that was not enough for me. I knew that I wanted to be somewhere where I could, I wanted to be at the source. I wanted to find out things. I love teaching, I love education, but it needs to be more than that for me. And so I kind of sort of organically rolled into research. I did my thesis, my master's thesis with Jan Rogiers, who was a very, very nice, very intelligent, very erudite man who pointed me in the direction of the history of the nobility and of women. And so I started doing that. And from there, I just knew that this was what I wanted to do. And of course, I was a bit older. I was 32 when I started my PhD. I was 27 when 27 or 28, I think, when I went back to university. So I already had worked. So I had tasted, company or corporate life. I knew what it was. So I think for me, the choice was much clearer when I went back to university. I had a much better idea of what is it that I actually like doing in life? What do I want to do? And so I just started looking out for a place at university, a place to do a PhD, without having a clear idea about profession or about what I wanted to do afterwards. I only knew that I wanted to keep on doing history. So that was the first step. It was just an idea of it shouldn't be finished after my master's. I want to do my master's, but please keep me into history. So that was just the only motivation to start a PhD.
And when you approached the end of your PhD, what was then? I think that's a turning point in many people's lives. Some go into academia, some go on postdocs, others go outside and never come back.
Well, I didn't finish my PhD. So I'm one of those people who started out doing a PhD with a lot of enthusiasm, but who haven't finished, or at least yet, because I don't consider myself to have quit doing a PhD. So for many reasons, this whole idea of staying in academia also fell through. If your PhD is not finished, that's it. It's really weird because you stop being employed at a certain moment at university. But I didn't consider myself to be something else than an academic or something else than a researcher. And I still consider myself to be a researcher, even though I'm what you might call an independent scholar now. So I have a strange connection still with academia. So I guess that's at a certain point, the choice was, somehow taken from me. There was never any choice to remain in academia.
What actually prevents you from finishing the PhD, if I might ask?
I think if I knew the answer to that question, it would have been finished already. So I never took a decision to stop for the simple reason that my PhD for me is very personal. It's my idea. It's my thing. It's my research. It's not very scientific to think about your PhD in such a way, I think. I don't think it's always very healthy either. But it's so much my thing that the idea of saying officially, I want to stop or I'm going to stop or whatever, never came across my mind. I was told by people, why do you keep on doing this? Why do you keep on publishing? Why do you keep on going to archives? Why? I mean, you never finished your PhD, but you're still doing research. You're still going to, you still try to find out new things, try to read about it, try to, be involved in some way. And I thought, yeah, well, maybe a lot of people wouldn't do it, but I just can't imagine doing anything else. This is, so it's very personal. And maybe that is also something, if you have this sort of unhealthy personal relationship with your research, it suddenly becomes really, really important. And when something is this important and determines your identity in such a way, I think that's maybe not really the best way to get the thing finished. I'm the sort of person that writes a sentence and I write another sentence and I immediately get angry with myself with saying, this is not right. That's not what I want to write. So I start over again and I start over again and again and again and again. Whereas I read this thing, and I think because when I first started out at university in Amsterdam, that was with Willem Vreelhoff. And Willem is actually the one who told me, I think one of the first conversations that we had, that was a PhD shouldn't be perfect. And for some reason or other, at the one side that has stuck with me, that idea, it doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be finished. At the other hand, I am just unable to take a step back and to not see it as this thing that should be perfect, which is just not a really good way of looking at it, I think. I just needed to take a step back at a certain moment in my life, and not think about this PhD that needed to be done within a certain time frame, that had to be finished when other people told me that it needed to be finished. I just very much needed to redevelop my whole relationship with it. And I have started writing again, and I have picked it up again, and I have started looking at my sources again, and I have went back. I did go back to the archives again. But I think at the moment, I just need to know that I can do it on my terms. And it's weird because I haven't looked at it in a couple of years. So it is weird to take it up again and to think this thing that has always been there, that's not finished, but that's still very much part of what I want to do with my life. It's not alien. It's still feeling home. The moment you pick it up, even if it's years ago, it still feels like that thing that you want to do. So who knows? Maybe I will finish it soon, or maybe it will take another 10 years. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. But I very much want to continue doing it. That's all I know.
I think with good mentoring, it should be possible to finish a PhD, no matter at which stage you are after so many years, because it's a question of a little bit of self-discipline and a little bit of motivation, especially when you're not bound by employment contract with the university or with any other commitments towards the university, and you're doing it on your own terms. It's practically your own decision. But your academic advisors, of course, need to guide you through and to ensure that you're on track and not being sidetracked with other things. But nonetheless, despite that, you have been publishing quite actively. Especially, I noticed that in the past few years, and we got to know each other on Twitter, and it was also thanks to the publications that you had. And it all revolves around early modern period, which is also a period of my interest, and that's how I became aware of your work, and I find it interesting. And you've been working with quite a few important scholars in this field of early modern history and of history of women. So even though you don't have a PhD, you still became a recognizable and respectable historian. And that's also something interesting, because normally we think, okay, if a person doesn't have a PhD, then, well, we don't really count him or her because, the title obliges, but in this case, there is no title.
Mm-hmm.
But your example shows that that's not really the case. You can still publish in good places with important people, your own work, not necessarily work of others, even though you are not officially a PhD student, because while being a PhD student, you are still given the grace of doubt that, well, we know that one day she will be a doctor, but in your case, it is something that is perhaps no longer assumed automatically. So I think it's a very interesting example of how it is still possible to do academic research without having the title, still be around and participate in things that are actually of your own interest. And I wanted to ask you, how do you combine this historical interest with the other things that you do in your life? I have seen in your CV that you are working in different constellations, sometimes giving lectures. You've even worked on a cruise ship, which I found fascinating. How do you manage to continue doing research or writing while doing other things that probably take most of your time?
As I said, I think it's mostly a state of mind. You know, it's interesting that you said that you made that remark, if I can get back to that, about not having a PhD and still do research and being more or less recognized for it. I think maybe that's a difference between the humanities and a lot of other sciences, in the sense that a lot of other sciences, you don't always need a PhD to go on, to do research and to be good at your job. And I think we have a very unhealthy relationship in the humanities with PhDs. I still consider it a very worthy goal. I admire people who have a PhD. That's the reason also why I don't want to give up. I love my research. But we are very fixated on it. And I don't actually like it when I hear people say that if you don't have a PhD, that you don't matter, or that you don't, you're not academically interesting. I think that's a very, very bad way at looking at knowledge. I think the quest for knowledge is a very worthy goal in your life, no matter how you accomplish that, either with a university degree or without, either with a PhD or without. And the thing that you would just, weed out people on the basis of a degree, I think is unfortunate. And it's something that we don't have in common with a lot of sciences. And I think maybe that's something that I still remember from starting in law school, where a lot of my professors, a lot of my teachers didn't have PhDs. They were accomplished people in their field.
That was my case too,
necessarily
in history.
PhD. I think, first of all, it's a matter of, it's a state of mind, and at the same time, you need to make a few choices. I mean, it's clear that if you're not paid to do what you're doing, then, you shouldn't do it full time. And this is a very dangerous thing to say, because I know that a lot of people who, for some reason or other, lose their financing at universities, keep on investing all of their time in their academic careers, even though they are no longer paid to do it. And there is this understanding that that is normal. Whereas I'm very much against that. I'm very much against the idea of having to work for free because somehow that is, expected of you and it shows your commitment. You can be totally committed and still divide up your time because, you still have to pay your bills and you have to eat, right? So I just started looking for things to do that would enable me to keep on doing history and hopefully leave some time to research or to publish. Not as much as I would have liked to do, but at least I was able to continue, remaining in contact with the people that I worked with, that I researched with. So I think it's a matter of very much of choice of what you actually want to do, how you want to keep on doing it, and just working around the idea that you have to necessarily work full-time in research to be a researcher. So I just looked for other things to do, and all of these things are just, temporary activities, giving lectures. I was a guide, which I very much enjoy doing. And I became independent. I started giving history lessons to expatriates in Belgium, because I very much believe in the healing qualities of historic knowledge. And as I said, there were periods of time that I just didn't have time to research actively. That doesn't mean that I that I wasn't interested anymore, that I couldn't anymore. It's just making a choice. You first of all need to work. You have to pay for your living. And then the time that remains is just the time that you spend doing what you love doing. And in my case, that was research, or that was writing, or that was reading. I mean, sometimes you don't have the time to publish or to research, but at least you can read. You can read up on what people are doing. You can try to follow lectures, especially now that so many seminars are going online on Zoom. That has been a godsend for a lot of independent scholars, and especially
even
for me
not
as well.
for independent who are located far away.
Exactly.
Because
and
we could
also,
not attend in person all the seminars held in Australia and in the States, and even
exactly.
in Belgium.
Yeah.
I'm located in Poland. It would not be possible for me to talk to you if it was
Exactly.
not for the technological means.
Yeah. So it's just, possibilities have opened up because of this. And so I'm very much taking advantage of the possibilities that were offered in that sense. And from the 1st of October, I'm starting a new job. I'm going to be a policy officer at the Young Academy, so which is a department of the Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for the arts and sciences.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very enthusiastic with that job. And again, it's kind of funny. I saw the announcement for this job when I immediately recognized myself in it. It's supporting, my job is supporting the work of young academics. So, I'm not an academic. For a long time, I haven't been an academic, but I always see myself in relation to academia. And so I was very happy to get this job, very enthusiastic to start this job. And at the same time, again, it's stimulating. It's stimulating to be around researchers. It's stimulating to be around academics. And I know that I will devote as much free time as I will get, which might not be that much, but whatever I have, I will continue to devote on my own interests and my own research.
That actually might be a very stimulating environment to finish your PhD. At least it seems to me like that.
I have to say my motivation also already came back a bit, because for a year and a half now, I've been involved in the Society of Court Studies. And I'm specifically the engagement officer. I kind of like these titles, but it very much says what I do. Because of course, because I was independent and had my own company, I had to do my own marketing, PR, things like that. So I've become a bit savvy in things like marketing stuff, and so that's very much what I've been doing for the Court Society. But that's very much also what stimulated me in looking for a job that would enable me to stay into contact with academia. So yeah, maybe it will be stimulating. Maybe, as I said, I don't know, maybe it's finished next year, maybe it's finished in 6 months' time, maybe it's finished in 10 years. I kind of like the idea that it's no longer this, sword of Damocles hanging over your head, which kind of decides your entire future, which is very much, I think, what young researchers are told that it is, and that I have the luxury of considering it a joy to do and a privilege to do.
So
No
we could
matter,
look at it
what
as
time it
alternative
is.
path to be a historian, to be an independent researcher, to choose your own topics. Of course, once you have sufficient skills as researcher, because I think if you're only finishing bachelor studies or just master studies, but not really engaging with PhD studies, it perhaps does not always give you enough. Although now that I think about it, I've met quite a few people, well, older people nowadays who are in their 60s and maybe even in their 70s who actually never went for PhD studies and still could be considered very important researchers and have done a lot of very important archival work or genealogical work or regular historical work. So I guess it takes talent and it takes persistence and it takes motivation. There is place for everybody in history, and be a good historian with having smaller number of publications, but still be recognized and fulfill his or her own need for research, for publishing, for going to conferences, for having academic contact. And I think it's important to realize that and realize what is the goal that we have for ourselves. Since my podcast is about showing different possibilities, I think that your story is really showing that it is one of very valid options of being there, but at the same time being independent and do what you want.
For me, history, it is less a vocation and less a job than a way of understanding the world. So I think both are very valid categories. I think, what it is, it's that I think I think things are changing, but for a long time, I think that the idea was that there is a sort of one size fits all. So you start doing this, and this is the way that you should do it. And if you don't, fall into that exact category, then, your experiences or your ideas are not completely valid. And I think that's completely wrong. There's no such thing as one size fits all. As I said, you see that the moment you start looking at people's academic careers or people's research careers, you see that there is no such thing as a path that everybody walked on and that is completely the same as what everybody else did. People have very different experiences, and you should probably leave room for that as well. I think the reason why for such a long time research was something, or PhDs or whatever, were exclusive to people from the middle classes or the wealthier groups in society, or men specifically, is because of that idea that one size fits all, and that one size that was tailored to the person of the middle class white man. I mean, we need to be honest about this. And I think that is very much changing. I think a lot of people are realizing that, you can make a decision to start a research career when you're 35, as opposed to when you're 25 or younger. It is possible to do something completely else, even have a different degree, and do very important historical research. It is possible to start out having a completely different background, to having to make tough choices sometime, and still continue doing this and still considering yourself a historian. There's this thing that it's very much you mentioned Violette Soon, with she wrote a book together with, I think, other people, I'm not sure now, that history is something that you do. Geschiedenis is een werkwoord. And I very much like that approach. I think there are lots of people who have studied history And then there are historians. And if you've studied history, you're not necessarily a historian. And you can be an historian without having a degree in history, because it's what you do actually that matters. When you do history, when you actively engage with it, when you try to find out how things worked. As I said, for me, history is a way of finding out how the world works. Then I think, when you're actively engaged with it, your background, even academic achievements, just suddenly become maybe less important. I don't know. It's a difficult thing to think about, but yeah, I think history. I mean, every path that brought you to it is equally valid. There's no such thing as as I said, a one size fits all. So if people consider it a profession, that's fine. If people consider it a vocation, that's fine. Whatever works for you. And I think we should tailor to different experiences and different frames of mind when we follow up on young researchers. I think mentoring should be a lot more, not about clear thoughts of doing it, but about individual characters and individual needs, individual talents. And no matter how difficult that is, and no matter how how much time that will probably take, if you have to tailor to individuals instead of forcing individuals to follow a predetermined path. I really do think that this will make better scholars, because you tailor to their needs, you tailor to their talents, you invest in them, and I think that investment at a certain moment will always come back if you do that. Instead of just supposing that the best thing to do is just let everybody do the exact same thing. I just don't think that works.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and inspiring conversation. It was a pleasure to have you in this podcast.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Michaël. I really liked it.